So one of the things that I love, and I've mentioned this before, is when concepts track in different areas. And what I've been thinking about recently is the ability of the people we're talking to be able to represent both sides of a discussion, both sides of an argument, to be able to perspective take for the other side. And that if you're talking to somebody that's not able to do this, then that's an indication that they truly do not understand what's happening. And so this applies not only in an interpersonal relationship, but also in politics or like current events or whatever. So if you're with a person and they are not able to perspective take for you, they are not able to understand where you're coming from, even if they don't agree, if they can't conceptualize the situation from a holistic perspective, then they are not perspective taking for you. They are not understanding your emotional, mental, mind space, why you're coming to the conclusions that you're coming to. And they're just being self-focused instead of relationship focused or, situationally focused. It's not just about me and my perspective. It's about, okay, well, this is where I'm coming from. This is where you're coming from. This is where I think we don't agree. Let's talk about it. But you have not only do you have a shared sense of reality where your Venn diagrams overlap, but then you can interpolate their side of the Venn diagram. Generally we kind of know our own, but you can interpolate their side, and so you're able to see the situation as a whole. And that discussion is a much better, more accurate discussion, and it means you're with a person who isn't just thinking about themselves, but is also understanding you. Like, that's super important in a relationship. Now, when we're having discussions with people in life, in the world, casually, whatever, and it's about politics, and you run up on somebody who's basically like, no, this is wrong, I have this opinion, this is why, and it's very one-sided, and they are not able to explain, well, here are both sides. This is what this side is saying, this is what this side is saying. This is where let's say, values conflict is, or a resource conflict is. They are not able to accurately represent the conflict itself and the individual elements and each side's perspective. Then they don't truly have an understanding of what's going on. They haven't done research. They haven't, they're just, their opinion is a knee-jerk opinion. I mean, we've all done it. I'm going to give you a fun, stupid example. Here we go. So, the last person I was dating was also into Star Trek. And we had gotten into a discussion about Star Trek captains, and, I've traditionally been like, Captain Picard, he's the bad, blah, blah, blah. And then I got older, and I was like, I don't know that I feel that way anymore. Honestly, Cisco, I mean, technically not a captain, but Cisco, he's, talk about a compelling, dynamic leader. So anyway, we're having this conversation about Star Trek captains. And he's talking about Kirk. And I basically was like, ew, no. Like, he's a player. Like, I don't, I don't even like the original series. Fuck that sexism. And, and he's like, well, have you watched the original series? I was like, fuck no. I've seen, like, The Trouble with Troubles, who hasn't? And that's an annoying episode. That's basically the Darmok and Jalad, but of the original series. Like, I know people love the Darmok Jalad episode in TNG, but it's so fucking annoying, and I can't. Like, conceptually, I agree. It's super brilliant. But, oh my God, if I ever watch it again, I would literally rather watch the Kardashians. Like, I can't even express it. Like, I detest that episode. Like, perceptually. I just don't ever want to experience it again. But anyway, so I basically formulated this opinion based off of, I don't know, like popular culture. I mean, I've seen the movies. I've seen Trouble with Triples, and I guess I've just been around Star Trek culture enough for the kind of base opinions to seep in. So, you know, here I am propagating a completely unfounded opinion on Kirk as a captain. You know, like knee-jerk disagreeing with my boyfriend. And so I broke up with them. But I've kind of been like going back to him, like, well, let me like look into XYZ, you know, and I figured out he was wrong about Bob Lazar, but he was right about Captain Kirk. So turns out the show is a lot more woke than I gave it credit for, a lot less sexist than season 1 TNG dealing with Tasha Yar. I'm not saying there isn't sexism, but it is not as bad as I thought it was going to be. That cast is diverse. We got Hispanic people in a space show, and then we got Sulu. We got her. I mean, it was just, you know, there's a lot of diversity there. And, you know, women were represented as like dark. Anyway, basically my perception of what that show was not accurate, and it was totally founded on completely peripheral things. And if he'd said to me, oh, hey, well, you know, what are the pros and cons of Captain Kirk? I probably would have been like, I don't know, because I didn't know. You know, I wasn't aware of Captain Kirk as a problem solver and as a tactician. I mean, like, you know, I know, you know, who doesn't know about you know, when he's in the academy and it's the unwinnable thing that he wins. Oh my gosh, it's like right at the tip of my brain. Anyway, you know, like, who doesn't know about that? But like, I'd never like integrated that into a knowledge of like, oh, Captain Kirk is a brilliant tactician, and, you know, a strategist, and he's a problem solver, and, you know, he's a really good leader. And I was noticing as I was watching the series, I'm still in the season 1, but as I'm watching the series, like, he's really tactile. Like, him and even Bones, like, they'll put like a hand on each other's shoulder, and it's really interesting because I don't really think I've seen that kind of physical affection between men in a show that I've watched. So that was kind of like startling, in a good way. Like, I don't think that's a bad thing at all. But long story short, here I am with this completely unfounded opinion, a knee-jerk response based off fucking nothing. And if he'd said to me, you know, what are your pros and cons, you know, like, what's the argument? And I would not have been able to tell him because I was not educated enough to tell him that. And so, if, you know, obviously we've had, you know, using the same person, we've had conversations about, you know, like, political, you know, especially with Trump going on, there's a lot of political discussions. And if I'd said to him, you know, well, what's the conversation? What are the arguments around this? You know, I don't think he would have known, because he's one of these people who does find like, oh, this is a person that I like, and I'm just going to agree with their analysis. Well, just because you agree with one person doesn't mean that you know what the arguments are, right? And if you don't know what the arguments are, you're not really educated on a topic, period, end of story. So if in your interpersonal relationships you're having an argument or discussion or a conflict with your partner, and I don't even mean about like, not about Star Trek, because that wasn't even an argument, that was just that was just a whatever. But if you're having a discussion and you cannot, or they cannot, articulate both sides of the situation and both perspectives, then they're not able to, or they're not perspective taking, and they're just being self-focused. So they don't have a true understanding of what's going on. And I ran into this with my ex like 5,000 billion times, you know, where I would be trying to perspective take for both of us, and he was not perspective taking for me at all. And I really should have gotten an understanding at that point, you know, over and over and over again over a period of years, that, you know, his inability to perspective take for me truly meant that he didn't understand me, and what he was attributing to me had nothing to do with me. It was all based on his own, you know, conclusions that he was drawing that had nothing to do with me. Like, one of the things that he said was, you know, as an example, he said that I want my ex-husband still hung up on me because it makes my ego feel better. And I was like, that's not even remotely close to it. You know, if he had asked me, like, first of all, asked me for clarification, or if he had perspective taken for me at all, you know, the reality of my perspective. So, you know, regardless of whether or not this is the truth or not, this is my perspective. The reality of my perspective is that this is, you know, this guy that I married at, you know, I met at 22, I married at 23, who's 10 years older, that we promised to be partners, that we would be there for each other, that we were going to be there till death do us part, or whatever. And he wasn't. Like, I was showing up for so much of our relationship, you know, to be a good partner and a good wife, and to move mountains to take care of him. And then when I needed him to step up and be there, not only was he not there, but he was resentful that I was asking for anything. You know, I'd gone from being a very independent person to, like, now I have a child. I've got an infant, our child, and I can't do it by myself. You know, so I think he struggled very much with, you know, subconsciously, I think he struggled with, you know, like, I married this independent woman, like, where'd she go? You know, and it's situational. There's, you know, there's a baby now. There's like so much a person could do, but yeah, anyway, so I have this person that I married, and then, you know, we made promises to each other, and then he abandoned me after I had tried so hard. And so it's not, oh, I want him hung up on me because it makes my ego feel better. It's, you know what? And I'm not saying this is like the best part of myself, but, you know, I was a good, amazing wife and partner to you, and you were not to me. And there's a part of me that hopes that he really feels the impact of what he has lost, that he misses what we had because I gave him everything within me to give. You know, which is very different than it's to make your ego feel better. That really has nothing to do with my perspective. I mean, now that doesn't necessarily mean that he's wrong. You know, we all of us have, you know, underlying operating subconscious drives and desires, you know, so he technically could be right. But the fact that he can't even articulate what my understanding of the situation means that his interpretation is less likely to be accurate because he doesn't even understand where I'm coming from. So how are you going to tell me what my underlying motivations are, my underlying feelings, my subconscious drives and desires, if you don't even know what my conscious drives and desires are, my conscious, you know, reasoning? Like, you don't have a complete, holistic, comprehensive understanding of my perspective or the conflict or the situation. So it's more likely that he's projecting something onto me that isn't necessarily there. But it's really hard to see that when you're in the middle of a particularly abuse dynamic, because a person is telling you things and it's like, well, is this right? Am I wrong? Like, you know, abuse victims tend to get really confused. And I really wish back then I'd gone, wait a minute, he can't even tell me what my perspective is. How the fuck is he gonna tell me what my underlying motivations are? Like, there's not a holistic understanding at all. There's no representation of, let's say, like the conflict or the situation. So that helps me go, this is not a person that is credible for me to take information from. He's not a reliable narrator on what is happening in this particular situation. Now, in my opinion, that was not just for that one argument or whatever. That would have been throughout our entire entire relationship. And it's the same when you get into a discussion or an argument with somebody about politics or whatever. If they're just knee-jerk, like, you know, communists or Antifa or whatever it is, you're like, what are both sides of the situation? My ex-boyfriend and I, we had a conversation about, you know, he's really upset about normalizing pedophilia. You know, looking at resources for providing mental health for pedophiles, you know, that is wrong. And I just, you know, I didn't come back at him confrontationally, but I asked him, I was like, well, what do you think the answer is? Like, what should be done here? Like, you can't just make them go away. Like, they exist. So what's the you know, what's the solution? Like, what do you think should happen? Let's talk about it policy-wise. Let's talk about it from a values perspective. Like, let's get in there and discuss it holistically. And it was pretty clear that he'd never really thought about it from those angles. He's always pretty good, though, about saying, like, when he doesn't know about an area. That's actually more my challenge. My challenge is going, oh, I don't know. Because if I feel like I know about something, like Captain Kirk, it was just like, I've got my opinion. So he's much better at recognizing when he doesn't know information. That's an area that I'm working on. But if you yourself are in a situation where you're feeling like attacked by another person, someone with a really strong opinion, and it's either towards you personally, like in an interpersonal relationship, or it's like politically or whatever, the answer is this other person able to look at it holistically? And truly, are we able to look at it holistically? Or are we just spouting off some reactive stuff? Do we understand like the nuances at play that really lets you know who has an educated perspective? And per my other video, that's one reason why I'm such a fan of going to where the experts are. What are the experts saying? What does the conversation look like? You know, because sometimes there's not a good answer. There's not a good answer for COVID. You know, we're making trade-offs. What are those trade-offs? What does the conversation look like? You know, when people get entrenched on their like each side, you know, perspectives without understanding like the comprehensive picture, that's where we start to run into problems. So anyway, hopefully this makes sense. You know, if you're really in a confused place about whether you can trust what someone is saying, I would not consider trusting what they are saying if they cannot represent a situation holistically. And that goes for interpersonal and current events / political events. Anyway, have a good night. I'll talk to you next time.